casting a long shadow across the empty room. She barely looked up when the person approached the counter, lost in the rhythm of her work.
Can I get a cappuccino?
The voice asked, light and familiar. Sarah blinked, startled, and looked up. It was Jason, someone she hadn't seen in months. Jason had been a friend from her dance days, someone she'd shared fleeting moments with in class and on the rare occasions when they crossed paths in the city. He'd always had a way of making people feel at ease, even when the world seemed chaotic. For a brief second, Sarah was struck by how out of place he seemed, standing there in the coffee shop, with his carefree grin and eyes that still sparkled with the kind of hope she had long since lost. He hadn't changed at all.
Hey,
She said quietly, wiping down the counter.
what brings you here?
Jason's smile faltered as he leaned against the counter.
I heard you were working here. Figured I'd stop by.
The words were casual, but Sarah could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He hadn't come to the coffee shop for just a cappuccino. He had come because he could feel the weight of the distance between them. She moved mechanically as she prepared his drink, the steam from the milk swirling in front of her face, blocking out the awkwardness. She wasn't sure how to interact with him anymore. She wasn't the person she used to be. Jason took his coffee, thanking her, and they stood in silence for a moment. She could feel the pull of the unspoken words between them. Finally he spoke again, his voice softer now.
You doing okay, Sarah?
His question seemed genuine, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it, as if he was afraid of the answer. She paused, the bitterness of her own truth rising in her throat. She didn't know how to answer, not honestly, not without breaking down. So instead, she gave him a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes.
Yeah, I'm fine.
She said quickly, wiping her hands on her apron as if trying to erase the weight of her own words. Jason didn't buy it. He studied her for a moment, then took a slow step closer.
You know, you don't have to pretend. You were always the strong one, Sarah. But it's okay to not be okay.
Her chest tightened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the tears building up behind her eyes. But she couldn't let him see it. Not here, not now. She turned away to grab a rag to clean up a spill, avoiding his gaze.
I'm not pretending.
She muttered, though even she knew how hollow the words were. Jason was quiet for a beat, then nodded.
Okay. Just, if you ever want to talk, I'm here.
She didn't respond, and Jason, sensing that the conversation was over, gave her a small nod before heading toward the door. As he left, Sarah watched his figure disappear into the night. She didn't know why, but she felt a sharp pang in her chest as the door closed behind him. The days that followed were filled with the same monotonous routine. She worked at the coffee shop, attended her therapy sessions, and went home to a house that was now eerily quiet. The solitude was suffocating, and every day felt like a repetition of the last, a series of hollow movements and muted conversations. But one day, it hit her harder than ever. She was at therapy, struggling through yet another round of exercises, when her therapist asked her to focus on her ankle, to push through the pain and really engage the muscles. She had done this 1,000 times before, but this time, something inside her snapped. The pain in her ankle flared, sharp and immediate, but it wasn't just physical pain. It was the emotional toll that had been quietly accumulating over time. All the frustration, the anger, the hopelessness she had buried deep inside came rushing to the surface. She couldn't push through it anymore. With a strangled cry, she collapsed on the mat, her hands shaking as she pressed them against her face. Her therapist immediately knelt beside her, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes.
I can't do this anymore.
She whispered, her voice raw and breaking.
I can't keep pretending I'm okay when I'm not.
Her therapist didn't say anything at first, just let the silence fill the room, heavy and thick. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but firm.
Sarah, you're allowed to feel everything you're feeling, but you have to let it out. You can't heal if you don't let yourself grieve what you've lost.
The words were simple, but they shattered something inside her. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly feel everything, The crushing weight of what had been taken from her, the suffocating loneliness, the anger at her body for betraying her, the disappointment in herself for not being able to move past it. After that session, something inside Sarah changed. She began to let go of the facade she had built around herself. It wasn't an immediate fix, but it was the beginning of something new. For the first time, she stopped hiding from the grief, stopped pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. She called Jason later that week, asking him to meet her at the coffee shop again. This time there were no walls between them, no pretense of being fine. She didn't tell him everything, but she didn't need to. He just listened, and that was enough. The struggle wasn't over. It would never be over. But in that moment, Sarah realized something important. Healing wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about learning to live with it. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Time had moved on, but Sarah hadn't. The silent suffering that began after her injury had turned into something deeper, something that clung to her like smoke, depression. It wasn't just sadness. It was a thick, unshakable fog that blurred her world into a series of meaningless days. Her room, once filled with posters of ballerinas and old trophies, was now a cluttered mess of laundry, half-finished notebooks, and cold cups of coffee. She rarely opened the curtains anymore. The sun, when it shone through the dusty glass, felt more like a mockery than a source of comfort. It started with a single morning. Her alarm rang, but she didn't move. The usual pressure to show up for her shift at the cafe or attend therapy was just gone. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Minutes passed, then hours. Her phone buzzed. First a message from her boss, then a voicemail from her mother, who had recently started working double shifts to make ends meet. But Sarah couldn't bring herself to answer. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. Her muscles ached, not from physical exertion, but from the heaviness of her own mind. It felt like her body was made of concrete. She tried to sit up, then collapsed back into the mattress with a frustrated sob. That was the first full day she stayed in bed. And it wouldn't be the last. The next week, she dragged herself back to work, hoping no one would notice the shadows under her eyes or the disheveled way she looked. But everything was off. Her hands shook as she poured coffee. She forgot orders. A customer complained when she gave them the wrong drink. Again. Later that day, her manager called her into the back room. He wasn't unkind, but he was blunt.
Sarah, you're not yourself. You've missed shifts. You're distracted. I can't keep covering for you.
She stared at the floor as he spoke, nodding absently. She wanted to fight back to explain, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain that every day feels like walking through wet cement? That smiling feels like a lie. That some mornings she debated even staying alive. She left work that day without saying goodbye to anyone. She didn't cry. She just walked the streets for hours, aimlessly, until her legs gave out and she sat on a park bench, watching people pass her by. They all looked like they had somewhere to go. They didn't. That night, Sarah sat in her room with a bottle of painkillers. Not many, just a few left over from the hospital after her surgery. But enough. The thought wasn't sudden. It had been building quietly, like a storm in the distance. She held the bottle in her hands, staring at it, shaking. Her thoughts turned darker. What was she even doing anymore? Her dreams were gone. Her family was broken. She had no job, no goals, no reason to keep pretending. The isolation was unbearable, and she couldn't remember the last time someone had truly looked her in the eyes and seen her. She twisted the cap open, her hands trembling. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Jason.
Hey. Just wanted to say I'm thinking about you today. Hope you're doing okay.
She stared at it, stunned. It wasn't much, but it was something. Her grip on the bottle loosened. And for the first time in days, she cried deep, raw, shaking sobs that she had been holding in for months. The bottle fell to the floor, forgotten, as she pulled her knees to her chest and let herself break. The next day she went back to therapy. Not because she wanted to, but because she knew if she didn't, she might not survive another night like that. She sat across from her therapist in a small office, walls lined with calming photos of nature that now felt almost insulting in their serenity. For a long time she said nothing. Just sat, arms folded, staring at the floor. Then her therapist asked gently,
Sarah, do you still want to be here?
She looked up, startled. He wasn't accusing. He was asking, truly asking. The dam broke.
No.
She whispered, her voice hoarse.
I don't know how to do this anymore. I'm tired. I'm tired of waking up and feeling like I already failed. I'm tired of pretending I'm okay when I haven't been for a long time.
Her therapist leaned forward. His voice steady but full of empathy.
You don't have to do it alone.
It was the first time in months that someone had said those words, and she believed them. When Sarah came home from therapy, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table. Her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. Her eyes were red. The house was silent.
I lost my second job today.
Mary said without looking up.
They cut hours. Said they couldn't afford to keep me.
Sarah stood frozen. It was like watching someone unravel in slow motion. Mary finally looked at her daughter.
I don't know how to keep this going. I don't know how to save us.
In that moment, Sarah saw the weight her mother had been carrying. The late-night shifts, the silent worry, the way she had been trying to stay strong for both of them. They were both drowning, and neither of them had wanted to admit it. Without a word, Sarah sat down beside her. For a long time they didn't speak. They just sat together in the dim light of the kitchen, two women who had lost so much, clinging to what little they had left. Each other. Sarah didn't go back to the cafe. That chapter had closed. Instead, her therapist had gently encouraged her to seek out something slower, quieter, something that didn't demand more of her than she could give. That's how she ended up shelving books at the local library. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. But it was calm. Predictable. The first few days were hard. She still flinched at loud noises. She still felt that gnawing hollowness in her chest when she watched a child spin through the aisles, arms stretched like wings, so much like the dancer she used to be. But there was comfort in the silence of the stacks, in the hum of fluorescent lights, in the scent of old paper and polished wood. It was a space where no one expected her to be anything other than what she was. Broken but trying. One afternoon, as she knelt in the nonfiction section, tacking a row of tipped-over biographies, an elderly woman approached her.
You have gentle hands.
The woman said, startling Sarah.
Like someone who's known pain.
Sarah looked up, momentarily unsure how to respond. The woman smiled softly, then walked away, leaving her stunned. For some reason, those words stayed with her. Late one night, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with a pen and a sheet of paper. She wasn't sure why. There was no assignment, no therapist asking her to reflect. Just felt like something she had to do. She wrote a letter to herself. To the version of her who had believed in stages and spotlights. To the girl who had taped her first pair of toe shoes to her bedroom wall. To the teenager who had once twirled in the hallway when she thought no one was watching. She wrote about the fall. Pain. The days she couldn't get out of bed. The times she hated herself for not being strong enough. But then she wrote about the survival. The library. Jason's message. Her mother's tears. The decision not to take those pills. And then she wrote the most difficult line of all.
I'm still here.
When she folded the letter and tucked it into her journal, she felt something unfamiliar, lightness. Not joy. Not yet. But relief. As if the act of putting it into words had released some of the weight. Jason came back into her life in small, careful ways. They started meeting for coffee after her shifts. No pressure. No questions she didn't want to answer. Sometimes they talked about movies, sometimes about nothing at all. Other times they sat in silence, sipping lukewarm drinks, and it was enough. One evening, after walking her home through the soft drizzle of spring rain, he handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a notebook, handmade. The cover had an etching of a ballerina, mid-pirouette.
I thought you might want to start writing again.
he said, avoiding her eyes. Sarah didn't speak. She just held the notebook against her chest, blinking back the tears that rose unexpectedly. It wasn't love in the fireworks and passion sense. It was something quieter, gentler, like someone holding your hand in the dark and not letting go. The most difficult moment came on a gray Saturday afternoon. Sarah walked past the dance studio for the first time in over a year. She didn't mean to. She had taken a different bus, one that wound past streets she used to know. When she saw the tall windows and the familiar red sign, something inside her twisted. She stood across the street for a long time, watching the students inside. Their movements were clumsy but eager. First years, probably. Learning the basics. The same floors she had once glided across now belonged to someone else. And yet, she didn't feel jealous. She felt something else. Sadness, yes, but also peace. Eventually, she crossed the street and approached the glass door. She didn't go in. Just placed her hand gently on the cool metal handle and whispered a quiet goodbye. Not to the dream, but to the version of herself who had lived in that world. It was the end of something, but maybe also the beginning of something new. Sarah never went back to dancing professionally. Her ankle would never allow it. But she began teaching beginner classes at a small community center on weekends. Her students were children who didn't care about technique or trophies. They laughed when they fell, clapped when they got something right, and hugged her without warning. First, Sarah felt like an imposter. But with every passing week, she felt the familiar rhythm return. Not in her body but in her soul. The studio wasn't grand. The mirrors were cracked. The floors creaked. But the joy was real. And when a little girl once asked her, wide-eyed,
"Did you ever dance on a big stage?"
Sarah smiled and said,
Yes. A long time ago.
and that was enough.